Hello guys, July here again. You have most likely heard about the Mental Health Awareness Week, which is why Jagex has been posting about it. If you watched any of my previous videos about mental health in RuneScape, then you might remember that I referred a couple of times to the stigma around mental health, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. Of course, apply to RuneScape when and where possible. Here is a short table of content of what I will talk about. So first I'll explain what the stigma is, and then how we know that there is a stigma, because that's important to understand as well. Then I will continue with how we, so also you, can help to break the stigma, and then lastly, I'll talk about something special as well that I've been planning and will reveal at the end of this video. Okay, so what is the stigma? Some of you might not even know what that word means or implies, so just in case, here's a quick definition. In the context of mental health, we need to differentiate between self-stigma and public stigma, which are terms used by the scientific community, by the way. Self-stigma is when someone feels either too ashamed of their mental health problems or feels inferior because of them. Public stigma, on the other hand, which is also called social stigma, is when other people in any way disapprove of you due to your mental health problems. In both cases, this is a big problem for the person struggling with mental health, because this stigma often causes embarrassment, discourages that person from speaking about their problems and from seeking professional help, and that is something that needs to change. So first, how do we know that there is a stigma in the first place? Well, you can even notice this in RuneScape, but the main reason why we know that there is a stigma, and a very persistent one, is because of the statistics and the results from scientific studies, which report a prevalence rate of mental issues that is not in accordance with how frequently people talk about their struggles. For example, according to a meta-analysis of 27 studies, 27% of Europeans have struggled with mental health in the past 12 months alone. For the USA, this is 26%. Would you ever have guessed such a high number? Probably not, because how often do you see or hear people talk about their problems? Almost never, right? Now here's the thing. If we look at games like RuneScape, then the prevalence is going to be even higher, so more than 27%. A few days ago, I explained this on Reddit, so I'll quickly read it for you here so that you don't have to look it up. So studies have indicated that the average weekly time spent on playing MMORPGs by a single individual is significantly higher than the average time spent by non-MMORPG players on playing other types of games. In addition to that, a recent study conducted in the Netherlands found that gamers with mental disorders are over 4 times as likely to play a role-playing game than any other type of game. Furthermore, pathological character traits associated with an asocial personality, such as shyness or low self-esteem, are more commonly found in people who show signs of problematic online gaming or pathological internet use, with evidence of psychopathology also being considered a predictor for pathological gaming in adolescents. Additionally, video game overuse and symptoms of internet gaming disorder are more commonly associated with MMORPGs than with other types of games. And there it ends. As we all know, RuneScape is a MMORPG, so according to the scientific research, the prevalence of mental health problems should be even higher in the RuneScape community. Is that true? Well, in November of 2016, I posted these mental health polls on the RuneScape Reddit pages, and more than 5,000 RuneScape players participated, in one poll even more than 20,000. Then later I discussed the results on YouTube. Those polls weren't supposed to be a scientific survey, but there were still several significant findings, including that 43% of the respondents reported having struggled with mental health in the last 12 months. So that's 43% compared to 27%. If you haven't already, I highly recommend that you watch the video about the straw polls as well after watching this one. I'll add the link to it in the video description. So continuing again with the question how we know that there is a stigma around mental health. Let me ask you a question. Those straw polls revealed that just under half of you guys struggle with mental health on an annual basis. But of how many people on your friends list do you know that they struggle with mental health? The answer is probably fewer than 5, while most people probably have more than 100 friends added on their friends list, so that's a significant discrepancy. But there's another way to confirm that there really is a stigma, and that's by looking at yourself, and I'll give an example. If you compare how you would feel about telling someone that you have the flu versus that you suffer from depression, you would almost certainly be more comfortable talking about the flu, and here's why that doesn't make sense. Even during flu season, there are fewer people with the flu than people with mental health issues or disorders, yet a lot more people are comfortable talking about having the flu. Obviously, the fact that the flu comes along with a series of hard-to-ignore physical symptoms plays a role in that too, but the point is that people are a lot more comfortable talking about the flu, which doesn't make sense at all, because the flu is statistically less common, ergo less normal, than mental health problems, and that's how severe the stigma is. Okay, so what can we do about that? What can we do to break the stigma? Before I get to that, it's important to mention that breaking the stigma absolutely needs to happen, because it's the stigma that keeps people from reaching out for professional help, and that's very bad. So here's how we can break the stigma and how you can help in that. One thing that we have to do is normalize mental health problems. Well, that's actually the goal, so that we're no longer ashamed to talk about our mental health problems or to seek professional help. The reason why we're not ashamed of, for example, having the flu is because it's not our fault. I mean, think about it. If you lose a board game that relies purely on luck, you wouldn't be ashamed of losing because there's nothing you could have done. But if you lose, for example, a game of chess, then I guess depending on your opponent, you might feel ashamed because you could have used a different strategy, but you didn't. Another example, and perhaps a better one, if you flunk a math test in high school because you didn't study, you might feel ashamed because people would be correct if they blamed you for it while you have no valid excuse. But if you flunked that same math test because you were ill for a few days and you just couldn't physically study, you wouldn't be ashamed because it's not your fault. Now the point that I want to make is that mental health problems aren't our fault either, so we aren't supposed to be ashamed of them. For example, most disorders or mental health problems are caused by either genetic factors or by anomalies related to the brain, such as a chemical imbalance or a different brain structure or less efficient neural networks. So it's not your fault, and one step towards becoming less ashamed is knowing that it is not your fault. Nevertheless, I'm not going to say don't be embarrassed, because frankly, that's quite shitty advice. That's like when people say don't be nervous. If you are embarrassed about your mental health problems, that's going to take a while to change, and the first important step in that is realizing that it's not your fault. Vice versa, if you don't have any mental health problems but you know people who do, understand that it's not their fault. Another way to normalize mental health problems is by talking about them. That doesn't mean you have to open up to just anyone about your problems, but if, for example, a friend in RuneScape or in real life asks how you're doing, just be honest. Whereas you'd currently say you're fine, instead tell them that you're not. And trust me, because I've been there, it's a lot easier to open up about your problems if someone else asks you instead of you having to bring it up out of nowhere. So if somebody asks you how you're doing, that's a golden opportunity for you. And like I said, that applies to RuneScape too, you know. For example, I talk to a RuneScape friend of mine almost every week about mental health problems, just for support and advice. You might even be more comfortable talking online than in real life, so make use of that in RuneScape. Conversely, if you are the one asking the question and your friend answers by talking about their problems, be serious about that. Even if you don't know what to say, just offering your help or asking if they want some advice could already go a long way. It would also help if you followed up, so if your friend who has been struggling logs in a few days later, ask how they've been or if anything has changed. That is how you can prepare your friends for seeking professional help if that's something that scares them right now. They might realize, hey, talking about this is actually not so bad. And if you manage to get to that point, then you've already contributed to trying to break the stigma. Another thing that you could do is this. If you're in my position and you have reached a point where you are comfortable talking about your mental health problems, consider sharing your story just to raise awareness. I used to have some pretty bad periods of depression, and I also used to struggle with severe social phobia throughout my entire adolescence, but over the years, I gradually got to the point where I felt ready to seek professional help. Even though it took me years, that process can be sped up by talking about your struggles to your friends or by having your friends talk to you about it to get you ready for the real deal when you decide to reach out to a psychologist. By the way, I was eventually diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which explained my susceptibility to mental health problems. And guess what? It wasn't my fault, because Asperger's syndrome has a genetic component and is characterized by a different wiring in the brain. So there's nothing that I could have done, and that helped me to accept my mental health problems and to be less ashamed of everything. So if you are comfortable enough with it, because I know that many of you aren't, share your problems as well. Here's how you can do that in RuneScape. So you happen to ask your friend how they're doing, and they reveal for the first time ever that they are struggling with their mental health. If you're comfortable enough to talk about your own problems, explain your problems to that friend as well, and you'll immediately notice that your friend will have a much easier time opening up to you. Why? Because you now have something in common, and you know that they're not going to judge you. See, this is how just talking about your mental health can already contribute to breaking the stigma, regardless of if you have mental health problems or not, and how two people with mental health problems can help each other as well just by talking about it. There are more things that you can do to break the stigma, but because this video is so long already, I will mention just one more thing that I really have to bring up, and that is learn about mental health problems and disorders, because there are so many misconceptions out there. I will list a few of them in a minute. Of course, it would also help a lot if schools incorporated basic psychology into their biology curriculum or so as well. Maybe they do in your country, but I know they don't in my country. The only way to learn about psychology and mental health here is by looking up information in your spare time, or by studying psychology or anything related to psychology at a university. Of course, you can't really affect what is taught in school, but you can learn about it in your spare time. Just reading Wikipedia articles is already good enough, or watching videos like this one here on YouTube. I will do my part here and discuss some of the biggest misconceptions that currently exist. Just by listening to me explain those misconceptions, you can already use that information next time you see someone who struggles with this or that mental health issue. One misconception that I have already clarified is that mental health problems are not our fault. It's usually something biological that causes it, such as a chemical imbalance in the brain, genetics, etc. Another misconception is that people with mental health problems or disorders are less capable or intellectually inferior, etc. Of course, people with an intellectual disability are indeed less able to do many things, but they are a minority group. You find mental health problems and disorders across the entire IQ bell curve. It's even possible for someone with a top 1% IQ to have a learning disability. I actually know someone who's in that situation. The same is true for people with autism spectrum disorder or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, etc. They can be found in all IQ categories, and they're just as able to achieve whatever you can achieve as well. Moving on, one misconception that really bothers me is related to depression. There are people who think that spending more time in nature or just spending more time outside will cure depression. The reason why this one bothers me is because I am involved in fighting pseudoscience, and in alternative medicine, which is a version of medicine that has no scientific support, the doctors like to claim that spending time in nature will cure depression, and there are a lot of people who genuinely believe that, but that's not true at all. Some people really depend on medication for that, and that cannot be fixed by spending time in nature. That is why it is essential to make a distinction between sadness and depression. On a relevant note, doctors can also help with mental problems, although their help is quite limited, which is why people sometimes advise to see either a doctor or a psychologist. If you ever consider reaching out to a doctor, make sure that they're an actual doctor who followed a science-based education program. You can easily look this up online by googling what alternative medicine consists of, and you will want to avoid those doctors. I also want to mention one big misconception about autism or Asperger's syndrome, both of which are since 2013 called autism spectrum disorder, by the way. One huge misconception, and this is why I'm sometimes still hesitant to tell people that I have autism spectrum disorder, is the incorrect belief that people with autism lack empathy or can't feel it as well as other people can. That's a myth. It is not true at all. People with autism spectrum disorder are very capable of feeling empathy, and they can even be more empathetic than you are, but the problem that they may struggle with is expressing that empathy. Feeling empathy and expressing empathy are two different things, okay? There is a fairly long explanation for that, so I will instead refer you to an article about this, which I will add to the video description, so have a look there after watching this video. A last misconception that I really feel I need to mention is related to ADHD. There is this popular belief that sugar causes hyperactivity or even ADHD, but that belief is not supported by science at all. Sugar is of course not so healthy, so you should limit your sugar intake regardless, but eating sugar won't make anyone hyperactive, including children, and it certainly won't cause ADHD. Then lastly, to conclude this part about misconceptions, keep in mind that perhaps the biggest misconception of them all is related to how common mental health problems are. In reality, they are a lot more common than you think, but we just don't show it to other people because of the stigma that exists. Okay, so the last part of this video is about an initiative that I've been working on. In my video about the straw polls, I mentioned that I would like to create a free and anonymous support platform for RuneScape players with mental health problems or with mental disorders. There already are support platforms online for really anyone who is struggling, so I have looked at how they operate, and I am sure that this could be done for the RuneScape community as well. So that's what I've been working on. It should be ready for release either later this month or early next month, so that's something to look forward to. Of course, it will be a beta because there are some problems that could arise. The support platform will then be evaluated after a few months to see if it works for the RuneScape community. More about this platform when I release it. I will make a new video then to announce its release. For now, however, I am looking for people who would be interested in moderating that platform together with me. So if you have studied psychology or if you know a lot about mental health and mental disorders in general, then feel free to send me a message. Keep in mind, however, I do require a decent level of knowledge about this. So if you know just a little bit about one or two disorders, that's not going to be enough. I would strongly prefer people who either already have studied or currently are studying psychology with an interest or specialization in clinical psychology. So if that's you and you'd like to help me with this, send me a message either here or on Twitter. Okay, so that was all. I hope that I have been able to inform you about and make you understand much better what this mental health stigma entails. So now you know what it is, how big it is, and what you can do both offline and in RuneScape to contribute to trying to break that stigma. Since this may have been a lot of information to absorb, you might want to rewatch this video at a later time. Also, quickly a reminder, I have 2 other mental health videos that you might want to watch, so make sure to check the video description. Then lastly, if you are interested in using that support platform, make sure to either subscribe or to follow me on Twitter, so that you don't miss its launch and the video about it. Thank you for watching. I am July and I hope that you enjoyed this video.